So in this session, we will talk about the Atelier and automated private instances. And it will be presented by myself, Sergei Shutov, developer from InterSystems Track Care Group in Sydney, and Ben Speed, manager of InterSystems Internal Application Services. Just for introduction of a few topics that we will cover in this presentation. I will talk a little bit about the best practices for development, about how we can automatically build private development instances, about Atelier and source control, about build servers and automated build classes, about continuous integration, automated unit tests. And I will demonstrate all of this together on the Widgets Direct sample application that we built for this global summit. So it's quite a few things to cover. And where do we start? We will start with the sample Widget Direct application that lives on the live server. So it's just one cache instance that hosts our application. There are some developers and users and testers and whoever else that are all using the same database and the same namespace and same cache environment. So that's a web-based application that is using REST services and Angular material. And there was a session about it, I think, yesterday morning, so you can go back and look at the slides and replay the presentation if you want to know better about the application itself. But today we are not focusing on the actually building application. That's the first step on this best development practices ladder that we came up with Ben when we were preparing for these demonstrations. We will talk about the next steps. So you are comfortable with authoring the code and using Atelier and Studio. And now you want to set up your source control. You want to set up your automation for testing and build process. And you want to set up your continuous integration so that every time there are some changes to your code base, it all kicks off automatically. And then there will be a few sessions on that provision automation that involves using Docker. There will be one session after this that will be presented by Jeff, and there are a few sessions on Dockers and containerization throughout the global summit. So if you are interested in this last bit, you're welcome to attend any containerization sessions. So that's the extent of what we are building. It's much more complex than the stuff where we started. So I will describe in a little bit more detail what we can see on this picture. So each developer will now get their own Iris instance. It will be their own database, namespace on the same local computer that they're developing. So we will have as many cache instances as many developers we have. They will all work with the same centralized source control repository, which will communicate to the build server. And the build server will build our Docker containers with the latest source code in the source control. And then our test environments, our live environments, and our development environments all can use these pre-built containers to quickly set up or update their environments. So what are we using for this? First of all, it's InterSystems Iris data platform. You can actually use Cacher, Ensemble, or any other data platform product. We are going to use Atelier, a new development environment. We will use some tools that are built into Cache, like installer and unit tests. So you can download all the stuff from intersystems.com. We will use Jenkins version 2 with pipeline and Docker plugins which you can get from the Jenkins.io. We will use the Docker itself that comes from docker.com. And for source control, we will use Git, which is a source control system written by Linus Torvalds originally, and a GitHub, which is a hosting site for your Git source control. And that's pretty much it. So just in a few words before we will go into demonstration, and I will show you how to quickly set up this quite complex configuration, just a little bit of information on how we are using different aspects. So for source control, we will use Atelier, which acts a little bit different from how we usually work with Studio. So Studio works with the server-side control hooks. And if some of you were in a previous session that Ben was presenting, that's exactly what we were showing. Atelier works with the file system and source control repository and data platform itself. So it integrates all this interaction between those three entities. And you don't need to worry too much about having updated your source control repository or your file system or your data platform. But the main source of truth is always in the file system. So Atelier works directly with your file system files, and then once time has come, it can push it into the source control repository, or it can push and pull into the data platform. All right, so a couple of words about the Git source control system that we will use today. Again, it's a little bit different from the classical source control systems like Perforce or Subversion in terms that it doesn't have a central server where you have to log in to do your work. So the Git is a distributed source control system, and that means that every developer that has their source control configured on their local computer actually has access to everything that is stored in the central repository. So you can do all the things that you usually need connection to servers, like querying the history or looking for who changed what in your file. You can all do it on your local computer. And then if you accidentally lose your central repository, it doesn't actually matter, because you can just copy over any of those local repositories to the central computer and start from there. You will have all your history of all your projects on each of the developers' computers. And it also adds an additional step when we are working to repositories. So usually when we are using the central source control, we are just doing commit and update. So you put something into your source control repository, and then you pull something from your source control repository. With Git, there is an additional step of pushing to the remote repository and pulling from the remote repository. So that actually allows you to commit some unfinished work to your local repository without disrupting any other developers. For central source control, we usually say you have to submit something that works. That's not true for distributed source control system. You can submit anything you like, but you have to push something that works. Continuous integration is a process of taking your source control, running the build, running the test, and then developing the next thing. So that process is being automated by the special software that is called Continuous Integration Platform. There are a few of them around. Probably most popular is Jenkins, but there are some from Atlassian. There is one from ThoughtWorks. There are some stuff from IBM and Microsoft, so you can use whatever you want. Jenkins is very popular and it's free, so we will use that one. And finally, Docker containers. So we have a few sessions on Docker containers. For sake of this session, you can think about the container as a lightweight virtual machine. But instead of having all the heavy stuff like a hypervisor and operation systems and libraries, it actually runs on the same operation system as your primary computer, in case if you have Linux. If you have Microsoft or Apple computers, you will need to have Linux on your virtual machine, and then it will run lightweight containers there. But luckily for us, Docker itself hides the Linux machine inside itself. And when we're working with Docker on macOS or on Windows, we don't really interact with Linux in any way if we don't need to. So that's pretty much the extent of the lecture, like theoretical parts that I want to talk to you about. And I will do a demonstration. And I hope it will be much more clear of what we are trying to achieve. I need just a few seconds to change my laptop preferences so that I can see what I'm actually showing.
If people would like a wall to lean against, you can come up here by this table or over there. Feel free to spread out and have a cluster by the door there. Oh, and there's a chair over there.
All right, that's it. So I will start with my Atelier. Here I have all my project already configured in Atelier, and if you want some information on how to actually start working with Atelier, there are a few brilliant sessions by Michelle Stolvik and by Nicole, who is doing the Atelier and Git stuff in much more detail that I will show you currently. So if you are interested in how to actually start working with Atelier, I will refer you to those sessions. But here I have everything on my local computer that is synchronized to my local health share environment with a user namespace where I used to develop my application, and now I want to add some source control into it. That's actually very easy to achieve with Atelier. I just right-click on the project, go to my team submenu, and click Share Project. So that's pretty much it. I create a new repository here. It will be Git Global Summit 2017. I click Finish. I click Finish again. And that's it. My source is now under the source control. Well, you can't really see anything, and I can't make it bigger. But there is a little question mark sign near each of my files, which indicates you that this file is not known to the source control. So what we need to do now is to add all our files into the source control. To do that, we go into the Git perspective. And we go to the Git staging view. I'll select my repository here, and it shows me all the files that I have in my repository. There are a few files that I don't want to submit. One of them is cache key, because this is the license for InterSystems Iris. I will just ignore this one. There are a few others like DSStore, which is an internal Mac special file, which I want to ignore as well. And that's pretty much it. I can submit everything else. So I just select all files, move them from the unstaged to the staged view. And the staged one is the actual files that will be submitted. You don't have to submit everything at once. You can still work on some files and only submit some other files. And I need a commit message. And I say commit. So now everything is under source control, and it is actually committed to the source control. So if I go back to Atelier, instead of question marks, I will have this little signs that it's already in the source control. the trick is that it's only in my source control on my local machine. What I need to do now is I need to submit it to the GitHub server. And to do that, I go to GitHub. OK, it's a different browser. I have already my username on GitHub set up. And I will just create a new repository on GitHub. I will call it WD, just for it to be shorter. Go create repository. And that's it. Now I have a repository where I can push my changes. So I can copy this to clipboard, go back to my Atelier, right-click here, and push branch master. It actually will populate all the link information from my clipboard into this form. So all I need to do is to set my username and password. And because I already tried to do this on this Atelier machine, it actually remembered it. And then press next, 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 finish, and it all is being sent to my GitHub account. Hooray, it's all there. So if I now switch to my browser and go to my widgets direct account, I can see, oh, wow, I have widgets direct here with all my classes and special files that I will describe in a few minutes. So what I want to show is that it's really easy with Atelier to submit your source code under the source control. I have a list of steps here so that I don't skip something. The next step that we will discuss is working with the installer and Docker builds. So the %installer is the special type of classes in cache that describe how you can build your, well, how you can install your application to the fresh cache installation. And there are a few options with the %installer classes. For example, you can install just by taking your cache.dat files and placing them into your application. But for our project, we will actually build from the source code. So we will take the source code, we will create new namespace and new databases, and then we will build the source code in those namespace. So I will just show you quickly how this build class looks like. So the main thing in this build class is the build manifest, which contains definition for the new namespace, for new databases. So here it basically says, I will just make it a little bit bigger. So I create a new namespace. I add 2 new databases, which I will use for code and for data. It's always nice to have separate databases for your code and for your data. And then I will have 2 applications just because of the way my application is written. One CSP application is to serve all the static files, and one CSP application is to serve all the REST requests. And then afterwards, I will just invoke the compile method. And I will take all the parameters through this build class method, which will be called from the build script. So that's pretty much, if you will run this method from the cache terminal, it will create you a new namespace, new databases, and it will compile you all the source code in there. But we are not going to run it from the terminal. We will run it from the build script. And the build script will be invoked from the Docker file. So the Docker file is a recipe to build your Docker image. I will not go into very deep details of what Docker is and how Docker images works. But you can think about the Docker image as a set of layers. On the very top layer, you have the operation system libraries that are required for the operation system to function. On the second level, you may have your Iris database And on the third level, you may have your application. So that's what we are defining here in the from. So currently, I will pull the iris image from Docker istinternal.com, which is our internal InterSystems Docker repository. But in the future, iris will be available here in the InterSystems/iris Global Summit 2017. I'm not sure when it will be available there for the public, but eventually you will be able just to pull the iris image from the public server. And then I have a few settings here, like which install script I will use, install file, application directory. And the main thing that powers the Docker build utility is this script. So here we will load the build routine, then we will run the build routine, then we will populate our widget data. So we have a special setup class that populates our database with some widgets. And then we will have some configuration for our CSP application. And at the end, we just start cache, run the script, and stop cache, and copy all our CSP and JavaScript files to the place where cache will actually look for it. And that's it. So that's pretty much all we need to do to build our own Docker image with the InterSystems iris and our application in it. So what I will now try to do is I will just go to my directory. It was Git Global Summit 17, widgets direct, and I will just build my Docker image. Okay. Oh, it's builder, sorry. So what this does is it takes InterSystems iris image and it runs the script inside the InterSystems iris. So you can now see it does create all the namespaces, databases here. Actually, you can't really see anything here. Okay, that's better. So it creates all our namespace and databases, then it compiles all our source code in there, and that's it. So now we have an image with our application in it that we can use. So we have a way to automatically build our application from the source code. Our next step would be to actually use this script in continuous integration server. For continuous integration server, I use Jenkins. So this is a standard setup of Jenkins, which doesn't have any jobs. Well, job is like the Jenkins tasks that it will run. So what we will need to do now is to create a new job. Again, it's very simple setup. In the Jenkins version 1, you had to set up a lot of things on the Jenkins side. Here, all we need to do is to add our name for this job and choose the type of job that we will have. And the nicest thing in Jenkins version 2 is the pipeline project type. So if we will select a pipeline, all we need to do is just define this pipeline script. And instead of defining the script by hand, we will just get this pipeline script from my source control management system. So we will select Git here, and I will paste my repository URL with my source code that I just submitted. So I paste it here, and the script path will be my widgets direct Jenkins file, because I may have a few projects in the same GitHub repository. So that's the extent of setup for Jenkins. That's it. We saved it, and now we have the new Jenkins job. Well, obviously, it's not as simple as that, because we still have to define our Jenkins file here, which will tell us how we should build this particular project. So don't pay attention to this build step, because this is the unit testing step that we are not running yet. It is commented out. Actually, extent of our setup are those 4 lines on the top. So all we do is we check out code from the source control, and then we run Docker build with some default parameters. And that's the extent of it. So actually, it's very simple setup. So let's try to run this. We go build now, and we can have a look here at what this build process does. So it gets all the source code from our Git repository. It runs our Docker build process, and then it finishes. Well, this last step is stopping the cache. It takes a little while. So it successfully built our first release. Well, obviously, it's not enough to just build something. We need to provision it into our test environment and into our live environment. And this is aspect of our next session that Jeff will talk about, how we can push something to the Docker image repository, and then how we can use Docker image repository to update our environments. But basically, it will be just another step here in the Jenkins file that will tell you app.push, and you will have your repository configuration there, and that's just another line. And after that, your image will be in either your private area of Docker Hub or your private Docker repository for your organization. Depends on how you want to set it up. So our last bit is to talk a little bit about unit testing. So I have a few unit tests here that are, again, available on the GitHub for you to look. But basically, I am using a little bit modified %unit test package that we use internally in TrackCare development, which has a few nice additions compared to the original unit test. One of them is ability to show the unit test class as a web page. Come on. Well, doesn't want to open it. OK. Another one is this unit test.factory, which allows you to create your user data classes quite easily. So you just submit the name of property and the value of property for as many properties as you like. And this factory will create this class and will populate all the required fields that you didn't pass here. And it will save it and return you the ID of this object in database. So what we are doing with this test is we just create a new widget, open it, convert it into JSON, and then check if we have our name as exported as JSON in this assert true statement. So let's try to run this test in Jenkins. To do that, we will uncomment this stage to test and validate. And basically, all this stage does is it takes our image that we built here, and inside this image, it runs the script. So it will do class unit test manager dot run recursive, and then do class unit test manager output test result XML, and then Jenkins will take this test.xml file and interpret it as the JUnit test result. Again, pretty simple. So let's save this and send it to our source control. So we will move it from staging to stage changes, add our comment, and commit and push. So now it will commit it to my local repository and automatically push it to my remote repository. So now when I run my Jenkins build job again, I will have 2 steps here once it will be actually run. Jenkins has quite a pretty interface. You can see the logs here as they actually run. It takes about half a minute to go through all the steps. And here you can see all the output for all our tests. We can see, well, it's all passed. Nice. So then when you refresh this view, you will have latest test result, no failures. It's interesting to see what will happen if there are some failures. So for example, somebody goes here and, well, let's say breaks our test. So instead of name widget 1, we want to receive name 1 widget 1. So we will submit this one. Submit it. We run our build again. And you will be able to see that it's now failed. One nice thing about Atelier is that you don't get just the cache editor. It's actually the whole development environment, which has a lot of features that you may use. One of the features is the actual connection between your development environment and Jenkins server. So if you will go and add another view, which is mylin build. And we will add a build server here, which will be our Jenkins build server, HTTP localhost 8080. OK, I need username and password here. So it can look for our widget direct job, and it can show us, oh, well, it has 1 test failing out of total of 1 test. And if I'll click here, it will give me some information of what actually happened. So we had this break, which was submitted here, so I can compare it to the previous revision. OK, no extension available. All right. But I can also see which test was failing. So I get some information from the Jenkins inside my integrated development environment. I don't need to go to this external server and see, well, is it green or is it red or is it yellow? It's all here in my development environment. All right, so if we go back here, we can see, well, now it's yellow. And if we refresh it, it should tell us, well, there was one test that wasn't failing. Now there is one test that is failing. Quite nice. So our next step would be to show you how we can create a new automated development instance for a developer which is just joined our company. Welcome, Ben Speed. Yeah, so he has a new notebook that doesn't have even cache installed on it. So it's just totally new. It has Atelier, and that's pretty much all it has. So can you switch to your...
All right, so let's switch over to my display. And as Sergei said, I've got brand new. This is literally a laptop that I borrowed from our marketing department this morning, just to give this demonstration. And all I did was install Atelier from the InterSystems download page. And then I also installed the Windows player for Docker off of the Docker site. So I installed those two packages, and I made, there's just two changes to the Docker settings. And this first one here is just because we're pulling from an internal address that doesn't have the certificate that Docker recognizes. That won't affect you because you'll be able to pull the Docker image once we make it public off of the Docker website. And then also for the Iris, InterSystems Iris image to run, we've got this storage driver that is used. So these are the only two changes that I made. And everything else is absolutely vanilla in terms of this laptop. It's a Windows 10 laptop, again, that I grabbed from marketing this morning. So I installed Atelier, and and the other thing that I did was I installed the eGit plugin for Atelier. So I installed Atelier, I got the eGit plugin, and now I'm off to the races. So I'm going to right-click in Atelier, and I select Import, and I'm actually going to pull a project from Git. I'm going to clone a URI, and I'm going to use the HTTP. Oh, wait a sec, I've got this. I did put some cheat sheets on. Am I supposed to pull this? Am I pulling that one? The widgets direct?
Yeah.
Okay, so this isn't actually the one that, this is the one that any of you can pull and build. This isn't the one that Sergei had done earlier, but it's got all the same code in it. All right, so it knows that I'm pulling from GitHub. I did put in my GitHub credentials so that I'd be able to submit back to it since I'm a new member of Sergei's development team, and certainly I'll be making changes, like making all the applications list my name instead of his. And so I just click next, and now I just need to define where it's going to live on my local, again, client-side hooks. Workspace lives locally on my system here. So I'm just going to drop it in a widgets direct directory and go ahead next through this. And I'm going to pull everything down. Next, and finish. So it pulled everything down from my widgets direct master out on GitHub. And you can see in my classes, CSP files, there's the Docker file, Jenkins file that Sergei was referring to before. And so now everything is finished. Now, as he mentioned before, we didn't want to push the cache keys out onto GitHub. Paul Grabshaw probably wouldn't be happy with us if we did that. So instead, I've just got my own local folder with keys here, and I'm going to go ahead and make a copy and put it in my local workspace. So actually, I need to put it in the widgets direct directory. So now the key is sitting in there along with all the build files and everything else that we need. So I'm going to jump into PowerShell. And I'm going to use the power of Docker plus all of the work that had been previously done by developers to make this as quick and as easy as possible. So again, my cheat sheet here, so I don't have to fat finger anything. So I'm going to drop into my directory. So again, this is the workspace that I created, and when I synced everything down from Git, it pulled all the files there. And now I'm going to do my Docker build. And I'm going to build my widgets direct version 1. And that built. And so now I've got the actual build file locally. And I'm going to go ahead and start it up. All right, so now we are started, and now I'm going to actually add, I've got to go back to Atelier. So what I have at this point is I have a Docker image running on my laptop. So on my laptop, there's a Docker container, and in that container, it's running InterSystems Iris, and it's has all the source for Widgets Direct, and everything is happy and running inside that container. I need to connect Atelier to that container so I can actually see the source and I can make changes to it. So underneath my server connection, I'm going to add a new server connection where the name is local, and it's localhost 57772. Credentials are _system and sys, and I'm going to test that connection. And it worked, so that means Atelier can call into that container, and it's going to be able to communicate with it. So I can go ahead and finish that. And now I go back to this Atelier project, which if you remember, this project was created simply by importing the GitHub contents. So it reached out, it got the repo off of GitHub, it pulled everything down, and it said, okay, here's an Atelier project, all the files in your local file system, no server connection yet. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that right now. And I'm going to say this project is pointing to my local server connection. So it's pointing it to that Docker image, and specifically the widgets direct namespace.
That's repair connection.
What was it? Sorry?
You just picked repair connection.
Thank you. I'm going to do the local copy on all of those. Thought I did change connection. Oh, so that's actually an Atelier bug. I'm running actually an old version of Atelier, and so we'll have to check in 1.1 and see if that's fixed.
It's just a mismatch.
It's a mismatch between the menu and the UI that came up. All right, so at this point, I can see. Okay, I made sure that, and the reason that it said things are out of date between the two is Atelier relies on timestamps, and it didn't know about the timestamps in that container. And so I knew that I just synced everything from source control, and so my workspace is true, and so I basically said, okay, use my workspace copy of everything, and so now it's in sync and it's got timestamps, so moving forward, it'll know what it actually is out of sync or has been changed. So if I drill down here in my CSP files, my widget direct, my welcome.csp, I open that up and I view it in my browser. There's my app. This is entirely running inside of the container that was built entirely from source, and the InterSystems Iris container that Sergei pulled from the container store. So, and now I'm a very happy developer. So you can see that took about, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes for me to get everything up, and I can start checking out changes and making changes and doing my work.
Well, there was a little bit of cheating on our side, obviously, because we already downloaded everything to the Docker cache. So when you first started, you will have to pull like about 1 gigabyte of data with Iris and operation system and everything. Right. But then once it's there, it starts pretty much in a few seconds.
So that was, go back to your, sorry. So go back to your PowerShell for a second, please.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do any cheating with the commands I ran. It's just the fact that I run these commands previously in Docker. It had cached the image of the container locally.
So the run would have been, you had to.
I didn't do any different commands. These are the exact same commands I did the very first time I opened everything up.
But the first time you did the run before, that's the point where it would take it longer.
It took longer.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
It was just downloading the container, and that's what.
moment.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, let me finish a little bit, and then we'll go to the questions, okay?
Sorry, Joel.
Because
opened up a can of worms there.
it actually just a few slides that I want to show you. So we have this widget direct on the GitHub, InterSystems widgets direct. It's exactly the same thing that Ben just pulled to his laptop. There is an article on development community about the widget direct application, and we will add a few articles to that covering the Jenkins and Docker in near future. There are other widget direct sessions. Most of them actually are already passed, but there will be a next session in the same room about the Docker containers, and there will be a few sessions tomorrow about the widget direct. So you can download my slides and just scroll through and see if you are interested in any of those sessions. And as a next step, with the Tech Exchange, find myself and Ben and other people who represent the Atelier development team. And download this code and try it yourself once we will have the iris image available on Docker Hub. So now the question time. Ben, if you can help me with the mic.
So we have, just raise your hand so we can use the mic to get it on the recording for later. I see the question back here.
Yeah, my quick question was the actual Docker container. What's the file system footprint on the local machine?
Sorry, I didn't really get it.
What's the size of the Docker container on the local machine?
OK, so the Docker container, there are a few layers of it. So the layer with operation system is about 100 megabytes. A layer with iris is about 600 megabytes. And then how many megabytes is your application is totally on you. So it's the minimum image size is about 800 megabytes.
Does Docker only work with Iris? Or can it work with Ensemble?
The question was, does Docker only work with Iris, InterSystems Iris, or does it also work with Ensemble?
So the InterSystems Iris is the container that we will officially have from InterSystems. But there are a few articles on the development community how you can build your own Docker containers for InterSystems Ensemble and InterSystems Cache made by Dmitry Maslenikov. I don't know if he's here. Yeah, this guy. So you can talk to him and go find his articles on development community how you can build your own Docker containers with Ensemble and Cache.
How do you tell Jenkins which Git branch to build and execute tests on?
So Jenkins actually have quite a few options to set up. I use just option to go to the master branch, and you can specify which branch you want to build. Another option is to set up a job that will build all branches from your remote repository. So it will create like a subtask for every branch and build it automatically. And if you are using multi-branch approach with Git, it's very useful because you will get everything tested in your development branches before you will push it back to master branch. All right. Oh, OK, one more question.
Can you share this?
Share
the
what?
build scripts and the Jenkins
Yeah,
configs
it's all there currently in the InterSystems repository named widget direct. So it has all the Jenkins files and Docker files. And once you have access to the iris image, you will actually be able to build it.
Yeah, so again, my demo, actually, all I did was connect it to the public repo that any of you can get at. And the only difference there is I also had access to getting the InterSystems Iris container, which you guys don't have access yet. But you can start looking at the scripts, and you can look at the Jenkins stuff and all of that. And then that will become publicly available later on.
So if you will build your container for Ensemble or Cache using the Dmitry's recipe, you will be able to just remove that first line, change it to your container,
Yep.
and it will just work.
All right.
All right, thank you very much.